What's going on all, it's Hadex Gaming with my playthrough of Core Keeper. Jumping in, I make myself a world, leaving all of the custom world gen alone and starting off with a warlock character, as I do love me a summon or minion class. Long story short, I touched a mysterious egg device and got beamed to this location. Not knowing where I was, or even if I was on the same planet, I begin by grabbing some wood, as I've played a survival game or two before, and checked out how the summons worked. The way the summons worked is that you don't just summon them once, they consume mana and stick around for a certain period of time before you need to summon them again. It was a different take, but the one I learnt to live with playing this game. I also saw 3 broken statues, and upon inspecting them, I figured I'd need to find 1 or 4 items to get them powered up so that I can activate the core and get out of here. To start off, I figured I'd check my menus and found that I have skills and skill trees. I also have 3 equipment sets from the beginning, but just as a quick spoiler, the equipment sets aren't something that I actually used and forgot about for most of the playthrough. I then got to crafting some torches and some tools so that I could set off and explore. Not even getting a few meters out from my base, I obtained a Shroomin cap and a Witch Doctor's hat. The Witch Doctor hat gave me an extra summon, effectively doubling my damage, and also showed me that armor is usually part of a set with unique set bonuses. Some of these sets are a little bit more useful than others though. And as I was equipping my armor and just reading my new items, I got notified that I could make fancier tools with a workstation. But I ignored that and cleared out some space and then decided to make my workstation. The controls in this game threw me off a little bit. Only being able to use items from the hotbar was a massive learning curve that caught me off for the entire playthrough. It's not a feature that I've seen used very often, if ever, from most survival games, but I crafted some new armor, a sword, a furnace, and there's no doubt I'd be able to start smelting ores to bars in the future. I also saw that my character was hungry and tried to eat food from my pack and just ended up yeeting them out of my backpack instead. So after eating it from the hotbar, I saw HP works in a similar way to Valheim. It's not a direct comparison, but it's the only other game I know that has a similar healing mechanic, and that's how I kind of related to it. So I eat food, and depending on the food, my HP heals slowly back for a certain amount of time. As I was out and about collecting copper, I stumbled across an ancient gemstone. And I had thought at the time I had found something crazy super rare with a name like Ancient Gemstone, and I was super excited to see what armor I could make from it. Turns out they act as a secondary material in most crafting items across the game, so it wasn't anything fancy. As I was exploring, I saw X's on the floor and figured X marks the spot, so I better dig it up. Upon digging it up, I obtained a unique loot bag with a small valuable pouch. This allowed me to get extra inventory space for sellable items. And then I went back to base and began smelting my copper. This would be essential for some upgrades, like the new tier of workbench, the salvage and reinforcement table, and most importantly, the cooking pot. On my travels, I found out that every 5 levels gets me a point to spend, and every 5 points I spend in one perk allowed me to progress down the skill tree. There was also a respec button, but I'd never used it throughout the game. I never felt I needed to, and I never got my levels too high anyway. I also found a golden heart berry, which said was super rare, so I put it in a chest, never to be seen again, as my gamer brain convinced me it was important. Kind of like in a Pokemon game where you don't use your repels or rare candies because you may need it at a more important time, and then you find that more important time never comes around. I grabbed my copper and crafted a few things. A watering can, the livestock workbench thingo, the salvage and repair station, and the cooking pot, and then upgraded my workstation from a wooden workstation to a copper workstation. So the way the game works, or how I found the kind of gameplay loop to work, is that each tier of workstation has its respective anvil and that tier of armor and weapons. And then there's also unique workbenches that assist in further progressing and some cosmetic decor stuff. I mentioned a cooking pot being important earlier, and that's because food heals and grants massive buffs. Some food increasing max health, others increasing crit chance, and so on. But the neat thing is that by combining 2 ingredients, you get the perks of both, but amplified. Not only that, but cooking is a skill in the game, as is fishing, and then making the number go bigger is always something fun that a lot of us RuneScape players can attest to, but also they have unique perks which allow me to heal more or get more out of my food and ingredients. As I was out exploring again, I stumbled across a music note door which I couldn't open, and it also heavily reminded me of Zelda. I also got some tin ore, which is presumably the next tier of ore, some pet pellets to feed potential pets later on for experience, and a set of chieftain shorts, which was a 2-set summon armor set, and my first magic weapon, the simple staff, which is neat. And then not so long after, I came across a new biome, the meadows. In the meadows, I find some cattle, and as always, I call my first pet or animal Rejects, named after my channel's mascot, and began to smash all the crates open and explore. I was also asked to name another, and I couldn't think of anything to name a ram, so I settled for Rambo, not my proudest name. I returned to base with my spoils and found myself a wash basin. Nothing wow or wonderful, but it acts as an infinite water source, meaning I don't have to trek it out just to fill my watering can anymore. I then headed north and stumbled across a slime-filled arena, and in the middle was a giant orange slime boss. I figured as a summoner, it would be an easy fight to just run about and avoid the attacks. And it was a very easy fight indeed. My bats put in the work, and the fight went super smooth. In hindsight, I probably should have dug up the slime floor to not be slowed down, but that was food for thought for another time. After defeating the boss, my bats completely ruined the big loot moment and destroyed the chest. That being said, I still got the loot, and I got a weird crystal, a ring of slime staff, a giant chest, and an NPC item that I could put down to have a settler move in. Alongside the boss fight, an NPC popped out of the slime who was willing to buy my stuff and also willing to sell a small selection of goodies. I went back to base and investigated the slime statue, only to find out that the crystal I had obtained powers the statue, and upon doing so got me 3 items to unlock: a slime sword and 2 boss scanners, which do exactly what they say. They scan the world to locate the boss. Super helpful, and I was one of 3 bosses down before the core activated, or so I thought. I cleared out a nice sized area to expand my base and build my first house and obtained my first NPC who I could sell stuff to. As I was defeating slimes and those shamans in the slime area, I saw my first glimpse of Ghorm the Destroyer. And to me, it's just crazy that these bosses just patrol areas. It was such a unique boss encounter and definitely looked like more than I could chew off at the time. So I just ignored it and went exploring some more, only to set off quite possibly the biggest chain of explosion I had seen yet. I also found some iron ore, which led me to believe I was in the wrong area, as I had just skipped entirely past the tin section. So I spent the next hour or so running around in all directions trying to find tin. I ended up finding a lively egg, which would turn out to be my first pet once I got it hatched, and I also obtained a swift feather offhand item that let me dash, which would no doubt prove to be very effective if I had used it correctly, or even at all. Without being able to find any tin whatsoever, I returned to base again and built a room for the holiday dude I get from the calendar item I bought. There was only one item in that entire shop that was probably worth getting, but I don't find that out until much later, and this ends up becoming an NPC I never used. I then smelted some glass, made a generator, and got to hatching my first egg. As I was searching for tin, I broke a crate and found an oracle card. Now at the time, I wasn't aware that this was very rare, but it felt important at the time, and I made sure to keep it. Almost 2 seconds after that, I finished off my Witch Doctor armor for the full set bonus, providing a huge buff to my minions. I also stumbled into new enemies in a new biome called the Clay Caves and found a sledgehammer. That sledgehammer was amazing at mining chunks out of walls, making it an optimal carving tool for pathways and corridors. I returned again with a small amount of tin and made a mushroom farm that I'm pretty sure I ignored for the entire playthrough, and then I sealed it off so that the little mushroom dudes that spawn couldn't get to my loot. Then, using the tin I had found, I upgraded my workbench to the Age of Tin, where I could craft a range of new workbenches, like the alchemy table for potions and the automation table for drills and cranes, which would come in super handy later on. I also crafted a summoning idol for Malugaz the Corrupted, and figured Malugaz would be boss number 2, as I already had the scanner, and there was no way I was taking it on Ghorm. That thing was huge. As I was placing some skill points in, I saw Vitality had a good one, that a percentage of my points got added as total health, so the more I leveled my skills, the more HP I'd have. As I was exploring and gathering tin, I stumbled across a ring of rock, which completed the ring set, getting me an achievement, but also now giving me more mining damage. Then, whilst I was trying to find a way into this temple, maze, labyrinth thingo, I stumbled across another waypoint and returned back to base to drop off my loot. I grabbed my pet egg out of the incubator and tried to equip it. It didn't work, and then I realized I had to hatch it from my inventory first, and then got my pet. It was an owl that gave me movement speed and damage. Then, as an avid animal lover, I also bought the egg from the merchant and started the incubation process for that one, and then crafted an automation table so I could start building drills and cranes and conveyor belts to see what I can get from those giant mining deposits. I returned to the waypoint I found earlier and made my way through the shrine ruins and obtained a ton of loot. I got armor for a ranger class, armor for mages, blast equipment, and even got a rare candy for my pet and a Valheim music sheet. That was a cool crossover I didn't even know existed. I also got a Tome of Ashes, which are these cute little fire minions that I decided I'd try out as they were more damage than the bats. I then placed the summon down and tried to beat the boss. This boss uses a few attacks. He shoots fireballs, teleports, and summons fire. This is going well, and then as the arena filled up with fire, it was getting harder and harder to dodge. But ultimately, I ended up getting my first death and only got the health 3/4 down. Thankfully, the deaths in this game aren't too harsh. You don't lose all your gear and your stats don't go down. Instead, you keep everything that you had in your active hotbar, and then you just have to return to your gravestone at your place of death to reclaim it all back. I didn't let death stop me and crafted 2 more summons and caved out the arena to be as big as it could be. The more space I had, the easier it would be to avoid the fires. So I tried the boss again. This time round, I don't even know what I was doing. I got hit right away and was being very sloppy. I lasted not that long at all and died before I even made a dent to the HP bar. Stubborn as I am, I returned for a 3rd time with my last skull and buffed up and used my summons alongside the slime staff. It was a rough start, but I managed to secure the kill. Or so I thought, until phase 2 started. A second phase on the 2nd boss fight caught me completely by surprise, and the mechanics for this phase I felt was a bit easier to deal with. He would teleport and punch, leaving behind fire. It's very telegraphed, and I secured the win. I got my loot moment this time, and in the chest I got my core piece for the statue, some generic loot, a skull necklace that boosts my minions for the cost of some total HP, and a beast booster, which is like a rare candy but on steroids, and magic armor. I returned to base, powered up my statue, and saw I could craft a hologram pod, no doubt for another NPC settler dude, a blue leather tome for magic, and an ancient ritual dagger. I did craft the tome as a full set bonus would be really good, and I already had the skull necklace, but I never ended up finding the ring to complete the set. I upgraded myself to iron and crafted a new smelter that could do the next 3 tiers of ores: gold, scarlet, and octarine. I won't show you everything, but I spent about 2 or so hours just exploring the surrounding biomes and areas and looting more ore. But I eventually stumbled across a waypoint directly next to Ghorm's path and thought that this would be a good place to clear out and ambush Ghorm when I was ready. I also hatched another pet that was a fire fox, which I decided to keep as it dealt burn damage, which seemed to be very good, as when I healed, I'd have to wait for me to heal and play a bit safer, so whilst I do that, the fox could damage the enemies. I didn't think I was ready for Ghorm and spent probably another hour exploring and found a new waystone next to a hive-like biome, which was gross. There was acid bugs and worms, and the walls moved. And I definitely didn't think I was ready for that either, but my minions were making good work out of them. And I found some inspiration for how I was going to tackle Ghorm. This hive area had spikes everywhere, so I dug them up and planned to use them to cut off Ghorm and get the drop on him. So I went to Ghorm's teleporter and started placing down spikes randomly along the path, and then played the waiting game. As Ghorm arrived, my plan worked. He was getting his health melted by those spikes, but I thought it ran away. And as I followed Ghorm, he had done a full 180 and began charging at me. The fight had started and I had caught its attention. This fight was crazy easy though. Just one phase, no cheap tactics, just a big bug that tried to dash into me. My summons made quick work of this, and the loot was pretty average. I got chieftain armor, which I already had, some generic loot, the statue piece that I needed, and a new backpack which was amazing, and a new NPC summon item. Yet again, I returned back to base and activated the final boss shrine before completing the core. But when I saw I had unlocked a home teleporter or a core teleporter, I knew how I had only just cracked the early game. I was fully prepared for one more fight for something to come out of the core, but I learned that if a game gives you teleporters, the map is about to get even bigger. So I went over to the core to find out what was next. The 3 boss summons only awakened the core, and the core then told me to seek out the titans of this world and destroy them to collect their souls so that we could restore the world, or something like that. And then I got the power to open the Great Wall to the north, which meant I was in for a rude awakening into mid-game. Before I headed north, I made housing for the new NPC who sold me boss summons and some pretty lengthy recipes for some rare weapons and gear. I then prepared and made my way to the wall. After reaching out to the wall, it collapsed and I ventured into Azios's wilderness. Now with a name like that, surely Azios was the next boss or the titan of this area. I also found this is where Scarlet Ore is, which opens up so much with drills and workstations, but also the dynamite here explodes differently, so I had to be sure to watch out for that. Then, in the Azios region, I found more giant ore rocks that needed drills, and as I wanted to mark them on my map, I couldn't for the life of me figure it out, and took to the controls screen to figure out what I was missing and why I couldn't. It wasn't until much later in my playthrough that I realized it was because I had to mark it with the middle mouse button, so when you see that on the map, just know that it took me forever to figure that out. It wasn't written anywhere and probably could have been made a little clearer. In the Azios region, I also found an ocarina. Now, I could have probably crafted an instrument forever ago, but I forgot about the workstation that let me craft musical instruments and found this instead, and decided to try open the music door I found earlier. It turns out, for the most part, or from what I figured out, it was trial and error unless I was blind or missed something else, but I eventually brute forced it and opened the door. Inside was some wood and a chest with some good loot. I got a recall idol, an upgrade to my hammer, a necklace for magic and minions, which was pretty good considering it was meant to be obtained much earlier. As I went to level my skills that I had been neglecting, I saw the Souls tab. It looked like I had 3 major bosses left and 3 minor bosses, and then no doubt probably a final boss after all that. So I had defeated 3 bosses in like 6 or 7 hours of gameplay, and now there was 7 more bosses, so the game has only just started. I remembered there was a holopod that I saw earlier and crafted that, and after doing so, I saw there was more than just those 7 speculated bosses, as there was 8 boss scanners and 3 trading items, but it looked like one was for a bird nest, the ocean, and the desert, and was most likely for an NPC or boss to go along with the 3 major bosses. And then I crafted the Azios and Hive Mother scanners. After using both of those, I saw I had a teleporter close to the Hive Mother, and the Sky Titan was quite a trek away, so I prepared for the Hive Mother instead. During my preparations, I made my Scarlet Workbench and some upgrades such as the Scarlet Pickaxe, and made my way to the Hive Mother. No boss summon was needed for this one. There was just a giant hive tentacle egg sac spawning thing in the middle of the room, and the fight was going well until I got stuck behind an egg sac thing and a wall, and then some exploding bugs came out and cornered me. So I returned and learnt my lesson. I caved out a bigger arena, and I cleared the slime and then began the fight. This fight went way smoother. And I got some loot, some armor, and some rings that gave life on melee hit. And then some food, but nothing that stood out as a story progression item. So the secondary bosses were, I'm assuming, all optional bosses that I didn't need to fight. They'd just be fun bosses to fight. Now they probably had some good rare, unique loot too, but I never fought them multiple times to find out. So as always, after defeating a boss, I returned to my base, allocated my skill points, and got to looking at the menus before realizing that my pets also had skill trees of their own. This would have been handy earlier, but it is what it is, and I could also name my pet. So I named it Spyro after one of my cats, who was named after the dragon. I then went and did a huge exploration of Azios Forest to get as much scarlet ore as possible, as I wanted to start making drills to 1, see what happens when I mine the ore veins, and then to also find out if they break, but 2, I was hoping if they did break that they would give a ton of ore, and then had more trouble marking it on my map again. I don't know if it was user error or skill issue or I missed it, but I still couldn't figure out how to mark it on my map. So unfortunately here, my recording corrupted and I didn't capture the 20 to 30 minutes of me figuring out how the drills and cranes worked. I was nearly just going to give up on it and cut my losses, but I figured I needed a generator to power them, which meant I needed wires to wire everything. And then the drill pulls all items it touches backwards through it. And then the crane had to be placed a certain way so that when it faced an item, it grabbed the item and then rotated 180 degrees to drop it behind it. But then the crane also had to be powered. And then if I placed a chest behind that, it would then go into the chest. It wasn't until much later into the game that I found out that I could drop it into a furnace, and from the furnace to a chest, cutting down the smelting time too. And then during my further explorations, I found an actual labyrinth, which in the very center had a clear gemstone. I believe this was one of the items I needed for the super secret mega rare weapon thing that dude sold. So I guess that was like one of 6 items down, I guess. I had explored so far north and was too stubborn to go back, as I didn't have a teleporter to return this far deep and didn't want to run back if I did need to come back. However, as you can see, I was ambushed by this giant worm-like centipede enemy and came up to another impenetrable wall. Even my bazooka didn't damage it. So I guess with my pickaxe broken and a bazooka that couldn't get me further, it was time to return back to base. As you can see, I found my fair share of scarlet ore, and this was all without utilizing an ore vein. I again went back, but stumbled across a mold infected area. These enemies were tough as a summoner, and I kid you not, it took like a good hour to clear out this area bit by bit. It worried me that the enemies essentially two-shot me, so I wanted to find better gear before tackling Azios. But I did end up with a full mold web armor set, which was nice as it granted immunity to the mold slow debuff. As I was exploring around the Azios arena, I found a teleporter. I'm beginning to see the pattern of a teleporter being near a boss each time, which is good to know. And then after I finished clearing a path from it straight to the arena, I saw the Azios shadow fly over. I knew for it to land, I needed to grab its attention. I returned to base, grabbed the large shiny egg, and returned to start the fight. And holy heck, I was expecting an eagle, but to get a tribal-like styled eagle just looks so crazy cool. By far the coolest looking boss I have seen in a game in a long time. Looks aside, the mechanics to this fight were relatively easy. Just dodge the easy lightning attacks, and towards the end of the fight, when it starts to spawn crystals, just mine them so he can't heal. That being said, I ignored the crystals for the most part, and my summons did enough damage that it went down super easy. As for the loot, I got duplicate rings, another NPC item, a large valuable loot bag, and some generic loot. I also got the soul, which allowed me to spawn thunder on melee crits sometimes, and then returned with a bug net to try catch this soul orb thing, but it turned out to be nothing. With Azios dead, it was time for the next boss. I asked the core and it told me to head southwest for Omoroth. But before I did that, I wanted to make my base a bit more homey and decorated and got started on some flooring. So I crafted about 600 floors and got to decorating. So I finished up my base with some floors and added some walls, and then made my way south to search for Omoroth. After some time, I stumbled across the Sunken Sea biome. This is no doubt where Omoroth would reside, but little did I know that it would be such an insane search. This biome contained these crab-like enemies who shot bubbles, which did crazy damage to me and caused me to slip and slide, but also the tentacle enemies too, which yeeted rocks at me. However, this biome contained a coral wood type and the octarine ore, which was an upgrade to the scarlet ore. Returning to my base, I decided to try and make a slime farm with a few crude drills. The idea was that the conveyor belts pushed all the slimes back into the pit, and the drills would eventually kill them and transport the loot into the chest. I also made some scarlet drills to mine this double node. I had it set so that the conveyor took the ore to a crane, and then placed it into a furnace, which then placed it into another crane that placed it into a chest. So not only is it auto farming forever, but it's also automatically smelting it. I then made myself a wood farm where the wood grows in one direction towards a drill, and then once it hits the drill, it breaks and is moved to a chest through a crane. I then upgraded my workstation to the Octarine workstation, but the Octarine workstation didn't have any notable upgrades that I got from it. I also decided to go out and try fight Ivy the Poisonous Mass boss. It was an optional boss, but it was fairly simple. The slime isn't lethal, and it just affects how much I can heal. But to deal with the boss, I just used a shovel to dig up the slimes around it, and let my summons deal with everything else. Then, if I got the chance, I'd use my bazooka to deal extra damage if there was an opening. The drops itself weren't anything to brag about again. I found a ring that makes me immune to poison, and a shield and sword, but I wasn't a melee class, so it was pretty useless to me. So again, nothing to help me, but just another optional boss down. Again, boss down, return to base. I crafted an Octarine furnace, allowing me to smelt Galaxite, Solarium, and Pandorium, which I'm guessing were the final 3 tiers of ore. And in preparation for the next boss, I made the expert fishing lure so that if I found the arena, I could summon and start the boss. I then finally applied my skill points and headed off again. As you can see, I've been placing blocks down to make bridges, but I feel it's soon time to make a boat. I decided to plunder and loot out the temples, and I did find a vending machine that had some extremely pricey items in it, but overall nothing fancy from the temple. Upon returning to the core to properly check out the vending machine, you can see there was some food in there and another oracle card and a lucky ring, which I didn't feel like grabbing. I then made myself a boat so I could traverse the ocean biome. I spent about 2 hours traversing this biome and came across a music door, which I opened again by brute force of trial and error, and snagged myself a nifty upgrade. I got the Galaxite Sledgehammer. Sledgehammer is always a good tool to carve pathways with, and then shortly after I found this fossilized leviathan or serpent-like thing, and found myself a ring that gave me 28% damage to bosses, which is just insane. Upon leaving that area, I found a giant water vessel that just swam straight by me and under all the islands with not a care in the world. I wasn't sure what it was, but nothing happened when I tried to use the lure on it. As I went back to the fossil island, another huge sea serpent snuck up on me and absolutely terrified me. I'm not crazy scared from deep water, but the fact that this thing was lurking in there gave me chills and reminded me of the first time I experienced Subnautica. I did try fishing and using the lure, but again, no luck, and the massive sea beast swam away. Determined to find this boss now, I made the Omoroth scanner. And of course, it was right in the middle of the area I was exploring. I had just done a loop around it. I spent hours in that water and naturally is right nearby the whole time. So I headed on over, fished in the whirlpool, and out came a giant sea urchin creature, Omoroth the Sea Titan. This was an extremely long fight as the minion tracking in this game is a little janky. For the minions to work, I had to be right next to the boss and then target them towards the boss. And then each time the boss dove away, the minions lost track of everything and had to be told what to do again. This fight was very tough too. Those whirlpools dealt crazy damage, and sometimes I got cornered and took a hit and then had to immediately heal up. But then not only that, it spawned tentacles which also dealt crazy damage. I swear this fight went on for a solid 10 to 15 minutes, but I did eventually win, snagging myself the Soul of Omoroth that gave me a plus 3% chance to spawn a tornado on a range hit. You can also see that my bazooka I had been using went from full repair to nearly broken by the end of the fight. And then as for the loot, I got a decent all-rounder necklace, a bit of glow, damage, dodge, speed, and armor, but the rest of the loot was absolute garbage and nothing to help me progress again. I went back to base again and began my search immediately for Ra Akar, which the core told me could be found to the east. So I headed on over and began mining out all of the Galaxite ore I could find, and had to find 20 of these desert scarab wing covers from the floor. This was a challenge in itself, as it felt like I spent the next 3 or 4 hours in the desert. And what you're seeing now is just me running and kiting these stupid explodey ladybug scarab things which were by far the worst enemy in the game to deal with. And my lack of defense on my summon armor was becoming an increasing challenge. Not to mention the tracking on the summons again. At first it was tolerable, but by now it was getting infuriating. But I had spent so long as a hybrid summoner class that I didn't want to give it up. After what felt like an eternity in the desert, I stumbled across a waystone and thought, great, I found myself the boss without the need for these very rare scarab wing covers. But as I searched around, I found nothing whatsoever except for a galaxite vein just south of the teleporter. That wasn't a bad find, but it wasn't helping me progress through. But I set up an 8 drill system for it. And also, as you can see, just one hit from an enemy almost kills me. This summon class was effectively just a don't get hit class. But to no avail, I kept searching and found this mammoth of a labyrinth. This game has a knack for them, but this one was 10 times bigger than the size of any of the other labyrinths I'd found. After weaving my way through it, I snagged tons of loot and galaxite chests, traps, and turrets, but found my way to the loot room in the middle. After removing all the traps and turrets, I looted the sarcophagus to find a Ra-Akar automaton. I had no idea what it did, but I had a feeling it would be used for the Ra-Akar boss fight I was looking for. I won't show you again, but I spent another hour or so in the desert, and as you can see, I've explored such a large area, and it's crazy to me just how big this biome is. Why did it need to be this big? By this point of the game, I was starting to get bored of the massive biomes and lack of direction. I knew I needed the scanner, but finding those wing covers was still proving to be just as tedious. I eventually did manage to get enough and craft a scanner, and of course, just like the ocean biome, I had gotten unlucky and it was in the middle of an area I had searched. So off I went, I buffed up, summoned my minions, but this fight felt different. The other bosses felt fair, but getting absolutely bombed by an onslaught of scarabs, plus those triangles that tracked me down to the ends of the earth, I died in like 3 hits and did next to no damage whatsoever. On top of that, as I went back to the boss to get my stuff and try again, I realized the boss summon items are a one-time use per attempt. Now it does say that, but I didn't see it, and to me that seemed very annoying. I feel like it should stay summoned, as in multiplayer only one person has to remain active for the second person to join back. So playing solo was much more punishing. However, I did craft another and came back for a rematch, except this time I prepared walls so that I could bait the triangles into them. That, however, didn't work, and it took only 2 triangles to kill me. I then went out of my way and crafted the anniversary cake from the holiday merchant, as that increased my max health. And I thought I was doing something wrong, so I took to Google to figure out if this Ra-Akar automaton was a key component to beating this boss. But then, to my newfound knowledge, I found out it was one of 3 items needed to make the God-sent armor. An armor that extended my dash times, gave me tons of protection and some other good buffs. So I decided to try my luck in finding the remaining 2 pieces. These would be found in 2 more labyrinths around the desert, and I think the time it took me to find all 3 items, I could have possibly just made a different armor set, raised my skills up for a different combat style, and then won the fight. As it took nearly 3 hours of exploration, so here is piece number 2, and then piece number 3 took the longest. And I ended up stumbling across another summon pedestal, but had no idea who, so I left it alone. That was probably a boss for another time. I also stumbled across a few icy biomes, or crystal biomes with the solarite orb, but I found a giant snail that couldn't be blown up, but found as I mined its shell away, I got solarite ore. This was a fun spin on obtaining the ore, and as you can see, I have a full galaxite set and a ranged weapon, as I got tired of dying in 2 hits and my summons just not targeting what I wanted them to hit. Look at this absurdity. Why is the desert so big? I was beginning to lose hope when I stumbled upon a different boss. This was a healthy distraction for me, but this boss also proved to be quite a challenge as well. He was strong enough to almost one-shot me, and then to combine that with the molten floor that caused burn damage, and the enemies that spawned around him proved to be quite challenging. Then, to top it all off, this boss has a mechanic where it summons meteorites, that if the meteorites get to it, it pretty much heals back to full health. I died so many times, but I'm stubborn when it comes to bosses that I can try over and over again. Rather than go out and get better, I just threw myself at the problem and hoped that it would work. Thankfully, this boss was near a waystone, and I could try as much as I wanted without having to summon it again. I eventually took a Scarlet Hoenn to remove the tiles during the fight, and managed to win. I accidentally destroyed the chest, but it seems the only good loot I got was a Burnzooka that pierces enemies and does a ton of mining damage. This was a nice distraction, and as I headed back to the desert to find this last item for the Godsent armor, I found a trio of Galaxite veins. I didn't end up utilizing it, but that would have been an amazing find earlier rather than later. So don't at me for this, but I found this really cool area with all these blue flowers and didn't even see the pedestal sitting in the middle. I got distracted by the X on the floor and assumed that that was the secret item. Upon editing this video, I can see I was very stupidly blind and left something of value behind. If anyone can let me know down in the comments what that was, that would be amazing. And so after about 5 or 6 hours in the desert in total, if not more, I found the final labyrinth, and my bazooka allowed me to blow up the labyrinth, so that felt nice. And then I obtained the final piece. But I then realized, with all that exploration, I still hadn't found the chests that required these items, so I had to continue exploring the desert. During my exploration of the desert, I found this giant cluster of blue ancient crystals and then nearly died to radiation damage. I had no idea what they were, but I marked it on my map and kept exploring. And then speaking of rare finds, I found this odd temple. I blew it up, only to get sniped by a turret. I swiftly returned as I found it strange that a tiny room like that was guarded, and found myself the Threads of Fate recipe under the pedestal. I have no idea and still have no idea what the Threads of Fate is for, but I'm assuming it's some ungodly weapon, as these oracle cards kept popping up rarely scattered all over the realm and the entire game, but that would be a mystery to solve for another time. Shortly after that, I also found the temple with the 3 chests containing the Godsent armor. And let me tell you, without this armor set, I don't think I would have made it through the rest of the game. Did this armor feel a tad overpowered? Yes. And did I feel bad for using it? No. I had spent almost an equal amount of hours getting this set than I did even getting to the point of looking for it. So I'd say it's well deserved, and you'll see its worth soon enough. Chest number 1, obtain the mask. Chest number 2, I obtained the pants. And then finally, chest number 3, I obtained the chest piece and the offhand dash feather. With the full set, and after reinforcing my armor and upgrading to the Godsent armor and a ranged weapon, I tried my luck at Ra Akar again. This time prepared with a strategy. I would just dash out of the way now that I had a longer dash, and the triangles would just never hit me. This boss this time went down a breeze. Not sure if it's because the ranged weapon was more consistent damage over the summons, or if it was the set bonus of the armor, but I snagged the win, and it felt like such an easy boss fight. As for the loot, I got an armor piece with a Thorn set bonus that I'd never use, as this armor was super glued to me now. After spending that many hours, I was never going to take it off. And I got a key item that would be used as part of the final key of progression. But that was the 3 main bosses I thought I had to defeat. Done. There was Azios, Omoroth, and Ra Akar. The soul bonus for this boss was a chance on melee or range hit to spawn a triangle of my own, which is really helpful in terms of additional DPS, especially due to the fact that this weapon hits so fast. I then spoke to the core, who told me I had 3 titans left. There was one to the north that could be summoned through Ancient Song. So, to get a Solarite workbench to progress, I needed a new wood type, which was found in the Crystal Caves biomes. So I set off to go get some. In my adventures, I stumbled across the Passage, an area I knew I wasn't ready to face yet, as I nearly got wiped out by a sulfur bug enemy, but then got hunted down by an even bigger one, which I decided to leave alone. I then went back to base and crafted the Solarite workstation, and then a Hydra altar. The Hydra altar allowed me to craft instruments to summon the 3 remaining beasts of the deep, and the scanners to go along with it. I had left Druidra, I think, Crydra, and Pyodra, the 3 titans. Obviously Druid, Grass, Crydra, Cryogenic, Ice, and Pyodra, Fire. So, whilst I waited for the gleam wood to turn into planks, I went out and nabbed myself enough radiant crystals to craft everything I needed, and crafted 1 of each scanner. I headed on over to Azios' forest and summoned the first titan, Druidra. It didn't mess around and targeted that instrument instantly. This boss was super fun and had some really good mechanics. First, it has armor that once dwindled down, stuns it, allowing me to damage it directly. It also has a laser beam attack that without my godsend armor and dashes, I feel would be incredibly difficult to avoid. It also has a radius blast attack that if not far enough away or behind cover would do big damage, I assume, as I never got hit by it. And then it can spawn minions and crash rocks from the roof. All in all, it was a very fun fight and I got some decent loot from it. An offhand that gave massive damage boosts, but to use it I'd have to give up my dash, which meant my godsend armor was kinda useless and I wasn't prepared to give up that either. I got a new large pouch for me, a magic armor piece, and items to craft the next instrument. And of course, the soul gives me an extra 10% HP, which is huge. I went back to base and made the wind instrument of ice and contemplated crafting a faster boat, but I decided to put it off as I needed 200 coral wood, which would take a while and I didn't want another grind. I just wanted to fight bosses. So I set out to fight Krydra. I put the instrument down and followed it back to the island so I could fight it. Krydra summoned one clone of itself, which proved to be very difficult. That serpent didn't mess around and I died almost instantly. But I didn't let that stop me and I went back, blew up the island so I had a huge space and tried again. The mechanics for this fight was identical to the last one, except this one had one clone and one extra attack where it shot out icicles in a direction that caused big damage. The fight went much better this time and the loot again was average. An offhand I didn't want to use, a summoning necklace, which I was no longer using summoning, and loot for the next Titan. I did, however, get distracted and forgot to check the soul ability, as I spent the next 10 minutes chasing the Atlantean worm, only to find out I had no idea how to fight it. I got ready and headed straight out to the desert to fight the third and final Titan, but had to clear out some space first. I summoned the boss, and away it went. This fight again was pretty much the same, except it had two clones, and instead of an icicle attack, it spewed out lava. Somehow, I found this fight to be much easier, and also found out that if I was close enough to the clones, they'd do a slam attack, which was much more manageable than the alternatives. But I won. I obtained a new backpack, which wasn't as good as my current one, a Pydra chest piece and necklace, in which I equipped the necklace as it caused burn on hit and gave some other good passives. I also got a Hydra bone sword and Hydra helm. As for the soul I got from that boss, it gave me 10% increased damage. So with all the bosses defeated, it was now time to talk to the core. The core told me to meet where it originally landed or sunk its route into this place, and coincidentally, I had already stumbled across it unknowingly earlier in the playthrough. So I headed on over right away. Upon approaching the crystal, it explodes, revealing an alien-like entity. I apologize for not reading the text or standing still here. The items around him dropped onto the floor and I wanted them as I didn't know what they were, but I also thought I'd get the chance to read the text and I didn't. But essentially, I think he said, now that I've released him, he doesn't want to share the world with us and attacks us. All that work for the core to be betrayed. So the fight is actually really fun. The boss itself can't be damaged until the 3 balls have been destroyed. And whilst trying to destroy them, it uses lightning walls to kind of get you to maneuver out of the way and spawns tornadoes all over the place that suck you in and cause damage. Upon finally beating him, he pulls a Malugaz and decides he's not done and starts a second phase. I wasn't caught off guard by this one though. I was kind of expecting a big finish, and that felt way too easy compared to the previous bosses. But this phase was essentially the same thing, but with one extra mechanic where the zone is engulfed into darkness and you have to stay within the light. A super fun fight, and would be very tough for any other class other than range and mage, but was quite underwhelming in terms of difficulty compared to the others, especially as a final boss fight. I'm not saying it was a bad fight, the fight itself was fun, it just didn't feel like final boss fight. But after beating him, he goes on about how maybe the unity of the realm is what kicked him out again. And then for the loot, we got 2 void guns, some armor, and an offhand that has great healing potential. However, the dash is again too good to pass up. So I head back to the core to see what it has to say, considering it sent me to my death. And as it finally awakes, it thanks me for removing the strange presence and then sends me home with a nice memento of the friends we made along the way. Now, I'm not sure if that final boss was part of the core or a blight on the world, but the core definitely sent me there, so I'm a little confused as to why. But nonetheless, it's been a very fun game, minus the huge biomes. But if you would like to see one more episode where I go through and clean up the remainder of the optional bosses, let me know down in the comments. I had a ton of fun playing this, and I would definitely be willing to come back and fight the remaining bosses. Also, let me know if I missed much else in the game. There was the passage I hopped into, but didn't explore, and some other rare items and things that I missed. But here are my stats and my base, just so you can see how far I progress and what I was working with. Anyway, I hope you all had a ton of fun with this, as I certainly did, and I hope you all have a happy time zone. That means good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you may be, and I hope to see you next time.